think it'll do very well. Quite confident it'll sell for you.
Peter, this isn't exactly the quality of glasses case you'd find at Vision Express these days, is it?
No, or even for my work glasses.
What a super quality thing. I mean, this really was produced in the days when, if you had everything that you ever wanted, this was just the ultimate, wasn't it?
Yeah, I suppose.
My goodness. Well, it's a really smart object. And the main body of it is made from tortoiseshell. Do you know where tortoiseshell comes from?
Tortoises?
That's what most people think. But this was made in the days when people didn't know the difference between turtles and tortoises. And tortoiseshell is actually from the sea turtle.
Oh.
Obviously, the best place for a bit of tortoiseshell is on the back of a sea turtle. But this was taken a long time ago. It's over 100 years old. This was probably made around 1860, 1870. And it's inlaid in mother of pearl, abalone, silver, gold, and really is a lovely quality object. And the interior is lined with watered silk. And made 1860, 1870, typical Victorian, very over the top in its style. And in the centre here we have two vacant cartouches. This could well have been for either a single owner or possibly one for his and one for hers, as we've got two sections for glasses in the centre there. I don't know. But being such a decorative object, what do you think it's worth?
70, 80 pounds, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think it's worth that and more. I would recommend a reserve of £80 with an estimate of 80 to 120, but I wouldn't be surprised if the eventual hammer price was 140 or 150 pounds. So I think it'll make probably almost 3 times what you're expecting. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, is that something you'd be prepared to sell?
I don't need it, so yes, why not?
And if it does sell and sells well, what are you going to spend the money on?
1950s Wade, I expect.
Right, okay. Fingers crossed. You might be able to find some at the auction.
We'll have a look.
Have a look.
Yeah, good.
I'll look with you.
Cheers.
It's tea for 2 for Nigel, but Barry could have brought a guest along if there hadn't been a small accident.
Right, Barry, thank you. You brought some wonderful Irish porcelain along.
That's right, yeah.
What can you tell me about it?
It belonged to my mother. It was given to her a few years ago by a friend. She died. The wife and I took it over. And I broke a cup last week.
So you're in the doghouse now, are you?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So the idea was to get rid of it before I do any more damage.
Well, what we've got here, we've got Irish porcelain. It's made in County Fermanagh, which is Southern Ireland. It's actually, the factory was founded in about 1863, I think. But this is what we call second period Beleg. This has a sort of a dog and heart mark on the bottom. You see there's a little dog and a heart there. And underneath that, we've got the ribbon mark that says County Fermanagh Island. That was used from 1891 onwards. So we're looking at what we call second period Beleg, but it's this very thinly potted porcelain with a very thin glaze. Often they made a lot of these sort of shell-formed pieces and coral. You've got these nice little winkle feet on the bottom here, at the base. It's not a very practical shape, is it, to drink out of? We try that it all sort of dribbles down the side of your mouth, so very pretty, decorative. So you've not managed to damage the teapot yet, have you?
Not yet.
No, you've done well.
No.
Because that's the main value item. Have you had an idea what it might be worth?
The wife said it was worth about £80.
For the whole lot?
I imagine so, yes. Yeah.
I think the teapot's worth that and more, you see, so I think we might be in with a chance with this one.
Sounds good.
Yeah, now we think probably 120, 180 pounds for the lot, and put it in with a reserve of maybe 100 pounds.
Good, yeah.
What are you going to do with the money?
Probably pay the council tax.
The council tax? It won't pay it all, then.
No, that's right. It'll help.
Oh, well, I hope we get you enough, anyway.
Yeah.
We're back at Riddetts Auction Galleries. Now, on Flog we see a lot of long case clocks, a bit like this one on our travels. And later on in the show, I'm going to be telling you what to look out for if you fancy buying one. It could save you a lot of hassle and a lot of time. And let's face it, time is something we could all do with a little bit more of. Watmore is more of a slave to time than most of us, for indeed, he's a bit of a Time Lord, and he's got this most remarkable collection of Dorset long case clocks. So I thought I'd come to the museum at the back of his house to pass some time talking about this remarkable and unique collection. Derek, when and why did you start collecting these gorgeous things?
Well, it started in 1962. We came to this old house in Dorset, and we'd never had a long case clock, and we thought one would fit in the house. So we bought this one.
That was the first clock?
The very first one, for £2, and it's by Drake of Beminster. We knew nothing about horology. We then discovered that these clocks were Dorset-based, so we decided we would collect them.
What makes a Dorset clock, then?
It's either the maker, which you can have in the earlier clocks, or when you come to this period, a retailer who would be an expert in clock repairing and other things to do with horology. In fact, we know he was apprenticed to someone, and he probably never made the case or the movement, but it's still a Dorset clock.
Yeah, £2 then. What's it worth today?
That one would make about 800 to 1,000 at auction.
At auction.
Yes.
It's got a lovely oak finish to it. It really has. It's got its original patina here.
Yes.
I mean, it's typical of a country clock, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Small proportion, flat hood, gorgeous. So, what happened then? You got your one clock?
Well, then they were so cheap, they were about £5 each, even in dealers, that I advertised, got 8 replies and bought them all.
What's the most expensive clock?
Well, we have paid over £5,000 for a clock, but these ones that we bought earlier, this one, for example, is probably worth 10 to 12,000, certainly in the dealers.
Really?
Well, it's signed by Harvey of Weymouth. He was not a clockmaker. He had a workshop. He looked after George III's clocks when he came to Weymouth, and he retailed. And these were obviously retailed to expensive clients.
Yeah, they look like they've been built for the big grand merchant houses, what you might find in Manchester and Liverpool, rather than down here in Dorset.
Oh, very much so. This wouldn't fit in our house.
No.
We've only got 7-foot ceilings.
And this is the earliest clock.
Yes, about 1695, by Richard Howe of Dorchester.
Now, is he a top maker to look out for?
In Dorset, yes, because he's the earliest one that we can find recorded at all.
Is he as good as they get, then?
He's very good, beautiful 5-pillar movement, thin pillars, very good quality.
Yeah. It's all going off here. Clocks are striking everywhere. Are you a stickler for time, surrounded by all these clocks?
No. One of the rules is you don't have them set to time, otherwise they all go off at once and they're not correct anyway.
That'll drive you mad, wouldn't
yes.
it? You can tell it's 17th century just by looking at these most wonderful barley twist turnings. Now, these haven't been turned, these have been carved by hand, because they had no lathe then. And I love the way that the spiral tapers from the bottom to the top. That is so typical of 17th century.
Yes.
And this is a lovely moulding. The moulding is convex rather than concave here.
Yes. And one of the main early points on it is the signature on the bottom of the plate.
Right.
That plate, instead of being on the chapter ring.
Right. That was something that happened in the 18th century. They were signing the chapter rings.
It moved onto the chapter ring, yes.
OK, the big question, how much did that cost?
Well, we paid about 4,000 for that.
Right.
And today's value?
Yeah.
Might be 10 to a Dorset collector, or even more.
So why the fascination with clocks?
Well, as a family, we've always liked furniture, and with a clock, you not only get the wood and the furniture, but it works. And it's almost like a heartbeat when you get the pendulum going. It's very restful to have it.
And here we are, we've ended up at the favourite clock. Why is it your favourite?
Well, this is Ralph Norman of Poole. He was a Quaker. He was apprenticed to Richard Howe, who we've met before. It's a quarter strike, and so it does a little bit more. It's a beautifully made dial, and it is really the most complicated one we have at this period, and certainly bang in the George I period.
Right, so this is about 1720s.
That's right, about that.
Lovely broken swan neck pediment up there. And of course, sort of the fashionable thing, Queen Anne period, was walnut.
Oh, yes. Would you like to hear it strike?
I certainly would, yes, please.
Right, well, I'll move the strike on.
That's so delicate.
Yes.
So who would own long case clocks then?
Somebody who could afford one. When you think that some people earn £2 to £5 a year,
Yeah.
possibly working in a big country house, they couldn't think of it. One method of getting a clock was to have a subscription clock, where several people would pay so much into the kitty, and every time you got to the value of a clock, whether it was a 2 guinea or a 5 guinea clock, a name was drawn out, you would then win the clock, and you would carry on.
And you'd be the owner of the clock?
You would be the owner of the clock, and all the others would hope that you carried on paying.
So what if you wanted to buy your own long case clock? Well, there's a lot to look out for. Take a long case movement like this. It may cost you £4,000 from your local antique shop, but it'll be guaranteed for a year and it'll be working. From an auction room, the same piece may cost up to £2,000, but buyer beware. Bought as seen, you're taking a risk. So it seems that's the best place to start, but you'll have to turn detective and do some homework if you want to buy and invest in a long case clock. And I think the first thing to think about is, where do you live? Do you want to buy a clock made by a local clockmaker? In that case, do some research. There's lots of books in publication that date back, let's say, to the late 17th century, with makers like Thomas Tompion and George Graham, based in London, where it all started. But then they moved out into the regions, and there's many famous clockmakers to look out for. This one is made in Manchester by Nathan Sanders, and they normally have their names actually stamped in the dials. This one's got a lovely dial. It's double chapter with Roman numerals, and it's a silver dial. And it's got some wonderful brass spandrels which decorate it. It's typical of a Manchester clock, Midlands clock. Quite broad and quite tall, made in mahogany. That's another thing to look out for. If you live in a town, then maybe you should want a large mahogany clock because they're grand and impressive, built for the merchant houses. If you live in a small cottage, go for an oak clock or a small country pine clock. The proportions are much smaller, which suit a cottage. The second thing to look